My best friend thought she had found love with someone who truly understood her. But what started as expensive gifts and secret meetings turned into a nightmare that almost destroyed her life. This is the story of how I discovered the truth, fought to save her, and helped bring down a predator who had hurt others before her. It was the middle of our sophomore year when I first noticed something was off with Sarah. We'd been inseparable since middle school, the kind of friends who knew each other's locker combinations, shared clothes without asking, and could finish each other's sentences. But that winter, everything changed. It started subtly. Sarah began showing up to school wearing designer sneakers, the kind that cost $300. Then came the leather jacket from Nordstrom, expensive makeup from Sephora, and a collection of rings that looked like they came from Tiffany's. Our friend group noticed immediately. We were all working part-time jobs at fast food restaurants and babysitting gigs, barely scraping together enough money for gas and movie tickets. There was no way Sarah could afford these things on her own. One afternoon, as we sat in the school parking lot after dismissal, our friend Rachel finally asked the question we were all thinking. "Okay, seriously, where are you getting all this stuff? Did you rob a bank or something?" She laughed, but there was genuine curiosity in her voice. Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. "Oh, my aunt got a really good job. She's been sending me things." The explanation came out too quickly, too rehearsed. I watched her fidget with the zipper on her new jacket, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. I didn't buy it for a second. Sarah's aunt lived in Florida and they barely talked. Plus, even if she did have a generous aunt, why would she suddenly start sending expensive gifts? It didn't add up. Over the next 2 weeks, I paid closer attention. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with notifications she wouldn't let any of us see. She'd glance at the screen, a small smile playing on her lips, then quickly flip her phone face down. When she thought no one was looking, I caught her taking selfies in the bathroom mirror, posing in ways that seemed too mature, too practiced. The real wake-up call came on a Friday after school. I was driving past the vintage shopping district downtown when I spotted Sarah's distinctive red hair. She was walking into an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list. What made my stomach drop wasn't just seeing her there, it was seeing who she was with. A man who looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s walked beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back in a way that was far too familiar. He was dressed in an expensive suit, the kind my dad wore to important business meetings. As I watched from my car, parked half a block away, he opened the restaurant door for her and they disappeared inside. My hands shook on the steering wheel. This couldn't be what it looked like. Maybe it was her uncle, a family friend. But even as I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, I knew the truth. The way he'd touched her, the way she'd leaned into him, that wasn't familial affection. That night, I texted Sarah asking if she wanted to hang out. She responded quickly, "Can't. Family dinner." The lie stung more than I expected. We'd always been honest with each other, or so I thought. The following Monday at school, I watched Sarah more carefully than ever. She seemed distracted during classes, doodling hearts and initials in the margins of her notebook. During lunch, she barely touched her food, spending most of the period texting under the table with a secretive smile on her face. When Rachel tried to grab her phone as a joke, Sarah's reaction was immediate and intense. "Don't touch that," she snapped, clutching the phone to her chest. The whole table fell silent. Sarah never yelled at anyone, especially not her friends. "Whoa, okay, sorry," Rachel said, holding up her hands defensively. "I was just messing around." Sarah's expression softened immediately, realizing she'd overreacted. "No, I'm sorry. I've just been stressed about the history test tomorrow." Another lie. We didn't have a history test. After school that day, I pulled Sarah aside before she could rush off to wherever she was always going these days. "Hey, can we talk? Just the two of us?" I kept my voice casual, friendly, even though my heart was racing. Sarah checked her phone, clearly calculating something. "I have like 15 minutes before I need to leave." We walked to my car and sat inside with the heat running. The March wind was still cold, making the windows fog up around us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Are you okay? I finally asked. You've been acting different lately. Sarah stared out the windshield, her jaw tight. I'm fine, just busy with stuff at home. Is it about the guy I saw you with on Friday? At Marcello's? The colour drained from her face. You saw that? Sarah, who is he? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. His name is Marcus. He's someone I've been seeing. How old is he? Why does that matter? Her defensive tone told me everything I needed to know. Sarah, he looked really old, like older than our parents. He's 37, she admitted, still not looking at me. But age is just a number. He treats me better than any guy our age ever could. My stomach turned. 37. Sarah was 16. How long has this been going on? A few months. He's my mum's business partner. Well, actually, he's her boss. They work at the same real estate agency. She finally turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A desperate need for me to understand, to approve. He really gets me, you know. He listens to me. He makes me feel special. Sarah, this isn't right. He's more than twice your age. He's your mom's boss. Does she know about this? Sarah's expression hardened. No, and you can't tell her. Promise me, Riley. This is my life, my choice. But promise me. Her voice cracked with desperation. If my mom finds out, she'll freak out. She won't understand. She'll ruin everything. I sat there, torn between loyalty to my friend and the screaming alarm bells in my head. Everything about this situation was wrong. A 37-year-old man pursuing a 16-year-old girl wasn't romance. It was predatory. I can't promise that, I said quietly. Sarah, I'm worried about you. This guy, Marcus, what he's doing is illegal. You're a minor. Sarah's face flushed with anger. I thought you were my friend. I thought I could trust you. She grabbed her backpack and threw open the car door. Forget I said anything. Sarah, wait. But she was already gone, slamming the door behind her. I watched her walk across the parking lot, her shoulders tense, her pace quick. As she reached the far corner, a sleek black BMW pulled up. Marcus. Sarah got into the passenger seat without looking back, and the car drove away. I sat in my car for a long time after they left, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? If I told Sarah's mom or a teacher, Sarah would never forgive me. She'd made that clear. But if I did nothing and something happened to her, I'd never forgive myself. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah getting into that BMW, saw the way Marcus's hand had rested on her back, possessive and intimate. The age gap alone was disturbing, but there was something else that bothered me. The power imbalance. He was her mother's boss, a wealthy businessman with connections and resources. Sarah was a 16-year-old high school student, still figuring out who she was. The next day at school, Sarah avoided me completely. When I tried to approach her between classes, she turned and walked the other way. At lunch, she sat at a different table with some girls from her art class. Rachel noticed immediately. What's going on with you and Sarah? She asked, glancing over at our friend sitting alone with virtual strangers. We had a disagreement, I said carefully. I couldn't tell Rachel the truth without breaking Sarah's confidence, even though Sarah was clearly furious with me. Must have been some disagreement, Rachel muttered. Over the next week, the distance between Sarah and me grew wider. She unfollowed me on all social media. She changed her route between classes to avoid running into me. When we ended up in the same room, she looked right through me as if I didn't exist. But even from a distance, I could see the changes continuing. Sarah had always been naturally pretty, but now she wore heavier makeup that made her look older. Her clothes became more sophisticated, more revealing. She carried herself differently too, with a kind of artificial confidence that seemed forced, practiced. The gifts kept coming. A gold necklace with a pendant that sparkled in the fluorescent school lights. Designer handbags. Expensive perfume I could smell from across the room. Each new item felt like evidence of something deeply wrong, but I had no idea how to stop it. I confided in my older sister Maya, who was home from college for spring break. We were sitting in her bedroom, and I'd just finished explaining everything I knew about Sarah and Marcus. Maya's expression was grave. Riley, this is textbook grooming. The gifts, the secrecy, making her feel special and mature, these are all classic tactics predators use. But Sarah thinks she's in love with him. She won't listen to me. Of course she won't. That's part of how grooming works. He's manipulated her into thinking this is a real relationship, that she's choosing this. But she's not. She's a kid, and he's an adult who knows exactly what he's doing. So what do I do? Maya thought for a moment. You need to tell someone, an adult who can actually do something about this. If I do that, Sarah will hate me forever. Maybe, Maya said gently, but she'll be safe. Sometimes being a good friend means doing the thing that makes them angry at you, because it's the right thing. I knew Maya was right, but the thought of betraying Sarah's trust, even to protect her, made me feel sick. I decided to try one more time to reach her. The opportunity came 2 weeks later when I literally ran into Sarah in the school bathroom. She'd been crying, her mascara smudged under her eyes. For a moment she seemed surprised to see me, then started to leave. Sarah, please wait, I said, blocking the door. I'm not going to lecture you. I just want to make sure you're okay, that's all. She hesitated, then slowly turned back around. I'm fine. You're crying. It's nothing, just hormones or whatever. But her voice wavered, betraying the lie. I handed her a paper towel and she took it, dabbing at her eyes. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, the sound of the bathroom fan humming above us. I miss you, I finally said. I miss my best friend. Sarah's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I miss you too, but you don't understand what it's like with Marcus. He makes me feel seen, like I matter. You've always mattered, Sarah. To me, to Rachel, to everyone who actually cares about you. It's different with him. He treats me like an adult, like an equal, not like some stupid kid. I chose my next words carefully. Has he ever made you do anything you didn't want to do? Sarah's expression changed, becoming guarded. What do you mean? I mean, is he pressuring you? About anything? She looked away. He wants me to come over to his apartment this weekend, when my mom thinks I'm at Rachel's house. My heart sank. Sarah, you can't do that. Why not? Because you think I'm too young to make my own decisions? Her defensiveness was back, sharp and cutting. Because I think he's dangerous. Sarah, he's almost 40 years old. He has to know that what he's doing is wrong. The fact that he's doing it anyway means he doesn't actually care about you. If he cared, he wouldn't be putting you in this position. You don't know him like I do. Then help me understand. What does a 37-year-old man want with a 16-year-old girl? What could you possibly have in common? Sarah's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You're just jealous because no one has ever loved you the way Marcus loves me. The words stung, even though I knew she didn't mean them. This isn't love, Sarah. Love doesn't involve lying to your mum. It doesn't involve secret meetings and hiding the relationship from everyone who cares about you. Real love doesn't require secrecy. You don't understand anything. Sarah pushed past me and ran out of the bathroom, leaving me standing there with a paper towel still in my hand. I knew I was running out of time. If Sarah went to Marcus's apartment, there was no telling what might happen. I had to do something, but what? If I told Sarah's mom, there was a chance she wouldn't believe me, or worse, that she'd blame Sarah somehow. If I went to the school counsellor, they'd be legally obligated to report it, which might help, but would definitely destroy any remaining trust Sarah had in me. That night, I made a decision. I was going to gather evidence. If I was going to tell someone about Marcus, I needed proof that would be impossible to dismiss or deny. I started by doing research online, learning about grooming behaviours and statutory rape laws in our state. What Marcus was doing was definitely illegal. The age of consent in our state was 18, and Sarah was only 16. Next, I created a timeline document, noting every expensive gift Sarah had received, every time I'd seen her get into Marcus's car, every lie she'd told about where she was going. I took screenshots of his social media profiles. His LinkedIn showed he was actually 42, not 37 like he'd told Sarah. He'd been divorced twice and had a daughter from his first marriage who was only 2 years younger than Sarah. The evidence was damning, but I still hesitated. This would blow up Sarah's entire life. Her relationship with her mom would be strained. She'd be humiliated at school when word got out. She'd probably never speak to me again. But then, 3 days later, everything changed. I was in the school library during my free period when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked pale, almost ghostly, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She scanned the room until she spotted me, then walked over with unsteady steps. "Can we talk?" she whispered. "Somewhere private?" We found an empty study room and closed the door. Sarah sat down heavily in one of the chairs, staring at her hands in her lap. I waited, giving her space to speak when she was ready. "I'm pregnant," she finally said, her voice barely audible. The world seemed to tilt. "What?" "I'm pregnant. I took 4 tests. They all said the same thing." She looked up at me, and I saw pure terror in her eyes. "Riley, I don't know what to do." I moved to the chair beside her and took her hands. They were ice cold. "Have you told Marcus?" She nodded. "Last night. He wasn't happy. He said I did this on purpose to trap him. He called me stupid and careless." Her voice broke. "He said I need to take care of it. That if I don't, he'll tell everyone I've been stalking him. That I made everything up. He said no one will believe me because I'm just some obsessed teenager." Rage burned through me, hot and righteous. "Sarah, he's lying. He's trying to scare you into silence. But what if he's right? What if no one believes me?" She was crying now, full-body sobs that shook her thin shoulders. "My mum is going to kill me. She's going to think I'm such a disappointment. Your mum loves you. She'll want to help you." "But Marcus is her boss, Riley. If this comes out, she could lose her job. We can't afford that. It's just me and her, and we're barely making rent as it is." I pulled Sarah into a hug, feeling her tears soak through my shirt. My mind was racing, trying to figure out the next move. This was bigger than I could handle alone. We needed adult help, professional help. "Sarah, we need to tell someone. A counselor, your mom, maybe even the police." She pulled back, panic flashing across her face. "No, no police. If the police get involved, everyone will know. It'll be all over school. I can't handle that." Okay, I said quickly, trying to calm her down. "No police yet. But we need to tell someone. What about the school counselor, Mrs. Chen? She's nice. She'll know what to do." Sarah hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Okay, but you have to stay with me. I can't do this alone." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. We skipped our next classes and went straight to Mrs. Chen's office. The counsellor took one look at Sarah's tear-stained face and immediately ushered us inside, closing the door and hanging a "Do Not Disturb" sign. "What's going on, girls?" Mrs. Chen asked gently, settling into her chair across from us. Sarah looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and began to speak. The whole story came pouring out. How Marcus had started paying attention to her at her mom's office holiday party back in December. How he'd started texting her, complimenting her intelligence and maturity. How he'd convinced her that their age difference didn't matter because she was special and different from other girls her age. The secret meetings, the expensive gifts, the pressure to keep everything hidden. And finally, the pregnancy. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Sarah finished, the counsellor reached across her desk and gently took Sarah's hand. "Sarah, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. Do you hear me? You are the victim here, not the perpetrator. This man, Marcus, he's what we call a sexual predator. What he's done to you is illegal, and it's abuse." "But I went along with it," Sarah protested weakly. "I thought I wanted it." "That's part of how grooming works," Mrs. Chen explained. "Predators like Marcus are very skilled at making their victims feel like they're willing participants. But Sarah, you're 16 years old. Under the law, you cannot consent to a sexual relationship with an adult. He knows that. He knew that when he started pursuing you." Sarah started crying again, and I put my arm around her shoulders. Mrs. Chen pulled out a box of tissues and handed it to us. "Here's what needs to happen next," Mrs. Chen said, her voice kind but firm. "First, I'm legally obligated to report this to Child Protective Services and the police. I know that's scary, but it's necessary to protect you and potentially other girls he might target. Other girls? Sarah asked, confused. Men like Marcus rarely have just one victim, Mrs. Chen said grimly. There may be others, either in his past or his present. By coming forward, you could be protecting them too. I hadn't thought about that, but Mrs. Chen was right. If Marcus was bold enough to pursue his employee's teenage daughter, he'd probably done this before. Second, Mrs. Chen continued, we need to contact your mother, Sarah. She has a right to know what's happening, and you're going to need her support. Sarah's face paled. What if she doesn't believe me? What if she chooses him over me? If she's half the mother I think she is, that won't happen, Mrs. Chen assured her. But I'll be here when we call her, and we can do it together. Over the next hour, a lot happened very quickly. Mrs. Chen called Sarah's mother, who left work immediately and arrived at the school within 20 minutes. Her face a mask of worry and confusion. When she learned what had been happening, she broke down completely, alternating between hugging Sarah and expressing shock and rage at Marcus. I'm so sorry, baby, Sarah's mom kept saying. I should have known. I should have protected you. It's not your fault, Mom, Sarah said, and I was struck by how she was comforting her mother even in the midst of her own crisis. The police were called next. 2 detectives arrived, a man and a woman, both wearing plain clothes. They were gentle with Sarah, explaining that they needed to ask her some questions, but that she could have her mom and Mrs. Chen present the entire time. I was asked to wait outside, which I did, my stomach in knots. An hour passed before Sarah emerged from Mrs. Chen's office, looking exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her mom had her arm around Sarah's waist, supporting her. Thank you, Sarah's mom said to me, her eyes red from crying. Thank you for being there for her when I wasn't. I'm her friend, I said simply. That's what friends do. Sarah hugged me tightly. I'm sorry I shut you out. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. None of that matters now, I told her. What matters is that you're safe. The detectives spoke with me next, asking about everything I'd witnessed and documented. I showed them my timeline and the screenshots I'd saved. The female detective, whose name was Detective Rodriguez, looked impressed. This is excellent work, she said. This kind of documentation can be crucial in these cases. You may have just helped us build a very strong case against this man. Will Sarah have to testify? I asked. In court? Possibly, Detective Rodriguez said. But we're going to do everything we can to protect her. And based on what she's told us and the evidence you've provided, we have enough to start an investigation. We'll be obtaining search warrants for his phone, computer, and apartment. If there's evidence of his relationship with Sarah, and I suspect there is, we'll find it. The next few days were a blur. Sarah stayed home from school while the police conducted their investigation. Marcus was arrested at his office 2 days later on charges of statutory rape, sexual exploitation of a minor, and child pornography. Apparently, they'd found explicit photos Sarah had sent him on his phone, photos he'd coerced her into taking. The news spread through school like wildfire. I tried my best to shut down the gossip and protect Sarah's privacy, but it was impossible. Everyone had an opinion. Some people were sympathetic, calling Marcus a monster and expressing support for Sarah. Others were cruel, suggesting Sarah had asked for it or that she was lying for attention. Rachel and I became Sarah's defenders, confronting anyone who dared to speak badly about her. More than once, I ended up in the principal's office for getting into heated arguments with classmates who didn't understand how serious this was. Sarah's mother pressed charges and also sued Marcus for damages. She lost her job at the real estate agency, not because anyone blamed her, but because she couldn't bear to work at a place where that man had been her supervisor, where she'd introduced him to her daughter without knowing what kind of person he really was. The pregnancy ended in a miscarriage during Sarah's second week at home. The doctors said it was likely due to stress, but Sarah felt strangely relieved. I couldn't have made that decision, she told me later, about keeping it or not. So in a way, the decision was made for me. Is that terrible? No, I assured her. It's not terrible, it's human. Sarah started therapy twice a week. Her therapist specialized in trauma and sexual abuse, and slowly, Sarah began to understand that what had happened to her wasn't love. It was exploitation. She started to see how Marcus had manipulated her, preying on her insecurities about her family's financial situation and her loneliness following her parents' divorce. He knew exactly what to say, Sarah told me one afternoon, months after everything had come out. We were sitting in her bedroom, the same room where she'd once hidden expensive gifts from Marcus. Now the room held only things that were truly hers. He figured out what I needed to hear, and he said it, that I was mature, that I was special, that he understood me in ways no one else could. That's what predators do, I said. They find vulnerable people and they exploit those vulnerabilities. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. I wish I'd listened to you when you first tried to warn me. You weren't ready to hear it then, but you heard it eventually, and that's what matters. The trial took place 9 months after Marcus's arrest. Sarah did have to testify, which was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. She had to sit in a courtroom full of strangers and describe intimate details of her relationship with Marcus, knowing that his defense attorney would try to make her look like a willing participant or even the instigator. I sat in the gallery every day of the trial, right behind Sarah's mum. I watched Sarah answer questions with a steady voice, even when the defense attorney tried to rattle her by asking invasive questions about her sexual history and whether she'd been attracted to older men before meeting Marcus. "Objection," the prosecutor would call out. "Relevance?" "Sustained," the judge would rule, shooting disapproving looks at the defense attorney. But despite the defense's attempts to discredit Sarah, the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages where Marcus explicitly acknowledged Sarah's age and expressed excitement about their forbidden relationship. Emails where he bragged to a friend about robbing the cradle. Security footage from his apartment building showing Sarah entering and leaving at all hours. And most damning of all, the testimony of 2 other women who came forward during the investigation. These women, now in their 20s, described similar experiences with Marcus when they were teenagers. One had been 17 when he met her at a coffee shop where she worked. Another had been 16 when he'd befriended her at a community centre where he volunteered. Both described the same pattern: the special attention, the expensive gifts, the insistence on secrecy, and eventually sexual relationships that left them feeling confused and exploited. Listening to their testimony, Sarah cried. Not for herself, but for them, and for whoever else Marcus might have hurt if he hadn't finally been stopped. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "On the charge of statutory rape in the 1st degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of sexual exploitation of a minor, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of possession of child pornography, how do you find?" "Guilty." Sarah's mother sobbed with relief. Sarah herself sat very still, her face unreadable. I wished I could reach out and hug her, but the bailiff had made it clear that spectators needed to remain in their seats. At sentencing 2 months later, the judge handed down 23 years in prison. Marcus would be in his 60s when he was released, and he'd be registered as a sex offender for the rest of his life. "Your actions," the judge said, looking directly at Marcus with barely concealed disgust, "represent a profound betrayal of trust and a grotesque abuse of power. You targeted vulnerable young women, exploited their youth and insecurity, and manipulated them into situations they were not mature enough to fully understand or consent to. This court has no sympathy for you, and society will be safer with you behind bars." Marcus showed no emotion, his face blank. But as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he glanced back at Sarah. Whatever he hoped to see on her face, fear, lingering affection, regret, he didn't find it. Sarah looked at him with something close to pity, then turned away. After the sentencing, Sarah's mom threw a small gathering at their apartment, not a celebration exactly, but a marking of the end of this chapter. Sarah's therapist had suggested it, a ritual to acknowledge closure. Rachel and a few other close friends came, along with Mrs. Chen from school and Detective Rodriguez, who'd become something of a guardian angel throughout the investigation and trial. "How are you feeling?" I asked Sarah as we sat on her bedroom floor, sharing a pizza like we used to do before everything happened. Sarah thought about it for a moment. Tired, she finally said. But also, free? Is that weird? Like, I know what happened to me was terrible and I'm still dealing with it in therapy, but Marcus can't hurt me anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore, and I get to move forward with my life. That's not weird at all, I told her. You survived something really traumatic and you came out the other side. You should feel proud of yourself. I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah said, her eyes getting misty. When I think about what might have happened if you hadn't kept pushing, if you hadn't insisted on helping even when I was pushing you away, I might have ended up pregnant at 16, isolated from everyone who cared about me, completely dependent on a man who was using me. Or worse. You would have figured it out eventually, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Maybe, but maybe not. There are girls who never get out of situations like that, who never realize they're being abused until it's too late. She looked at me seriously. You saved my life, Riley. You really did. We hugged for a long time, both of us crying. When we pulled apart, Rachel joined us on the floor, and soon it turned into a group hug with all of Sarah's closest friends piled on top of each other, laughing through our tears. In the living room, I could hear Sarah's mom talking with Detective Rodriguez about her plans to start an advocacy group for families affected by sexual abuse. She'd found a new job at a different real estate agency, one with better boundaries and more oversight. She was also going to therapy, working through her own guilt and anger about what had happened to her daughter. I should have known, she'd said to me once. All those late nights Marcus claimed he was working, all those business dinners. He was probably with my daughter, or someone like her. And I just trusted him. I brought him into our lives. I'd reminded her of what Mrs. Chen had said. Predators are skilled at deception. They're good at appearing trustworthy and normal. That's how they get away with it for so long. As senior year started, Sarah returned to school. She'd missed most of the previous semester due to the trial, but she worked hard over the summer to catch up. Some students whispered and stared, but most people had moved on to other gossip. Sarah held her head high, refusing to be ashamed of what had happened to her. She'd changed, though. The girl who'd once been quiet and introverted now spoke up in class, joined the debate team, and started a club for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. She wanted to use her experience to help others, to make sure no one else felt as alone as she had. I want other girls to know the warning signs, she explained to me as we worked on flyers for the new club. The age gaps, the secrecy, the expensive gifts, the isolation from friends and family. If I can help even one person recognize that they're being groomed, it'll be worth it. The club started small, just Sarah, me, Rachel, and 3 other girls from our grade. But word spread, and soon we were getting emails from students asking if they could join, some sharing their own stories of abuse and exploitation. The school administration was supportive, even bringing in speakers from local organizations to talk about healthy relationships and recognizing red flags. Sarah also became an advocate beyond our school. She did an interview with the local news, her face shown only in silhouette to protect her identity, talking about the dangers of adults preying on teenagers. She wrote an article for an online magazine about her experience that went viral, generating thousands of comments from other survivors sharing their stories. Through all of this, I watched my best friend transform from a victim into a survivor, and then into an advocate and warrior. She took the worst experience of her life and turned it into something meaningful, something that could help others. Of course, it wasn't all strength and advocacy. There were still bad days. Days when Sarah couldn't get out of bed because the trauma felt too heavy. Days when she had panic attacks triggered by seemingly innocent things. A certain cologne someone wore that reminded her of Marcus. A black BMW in a parking lot. An older man paying too much attention to a teenage girl at the mall. But she learned coping mechanisms in therapy. She built a support system of people who understood. And slowly the bad days became less frequent. As for me, I learned a lot from this experience too. I learned that sometimes being a good friend means doing the hard thing, the unpopular thing, even when your friend is angry at you for it. I learned that silence protects predators, and that speaking up, even when it's scary, can literally save lives. I also learned about the systems in place and not in place to protect young people from predators. Through Sarah's advocacy work, we discovered that Marcus had actually been reported for inappropriate behavior with a teenager at a previous job, but the complaint had been dismissed as a misunderstanding. If that report had been taken seriously, if there had been a real investigation, Sarah might never have been hurt. That knowledge fueled our advocacy even more. Sarah and her mum began lobbying for changes to reporting laws, pushing for mandatory training for employers on recognizing grooming behaviors, and advocating for better resources for survivors of sexual abuse. By the time we graduated high school, Sarah had been accepted to a prestigious university where she planned to study psychology with a focus on trauma. She wanted to become a therapist who specialized in working with survivors of sexual abuse, using her own experience to help others heal. At graduation, Sarah gave a speech as class vice president. She didn't explicitly mention what had happened to her, but everyone who knew her story understood what she was talking about when she said, "We've all faced challenges during our time here. Some of us have faced challenges that no young person should have to face. But those challenges don't define us. How we respond to them, how we grow from them, how we help others because of them, that's what defines us. To anyone struggling with something difficult, something that feels too big to handle alone, reach out. Talk to a friend, a parent, a counselor, a teacher. Don't suffer in silence. And to those of you who notice someone struggling, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will help. Be the person who reaches out, who asks the hard questions, who refuses to let your friend face their demons alone." As she spoke, I caught her eye across the stage. She smiled at me and I smiled back, both of us remembering that day in the school bathroom when everything had started to change. After the ceremony, as we took photos in our caps and gowns, Sarah's mum pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "You saved my daughter. I was so caught up in my own life, in trying to keep us afloat financially, that I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. But you saw it, and you didn't give up, even when Sarah pushed you away. I will never forget that." I hugged her tightly. "Sarah is my best friend. I'd do anything for her. I know you would, and you did." College brought new challenges and new growth for both Sarah and me. We attended different universities. Sarah went to a large state school with a renowned psychology program, while I headed to a smaller liberal arts college a few hours away. But we stayed close, texting daily and visiting each other when we could. Sarah thrived in college. She joined several advocacy organizations, became a peer counselor, and continued speaking publicly about her experience. She was featured in a documentary about predatory behavior in professional settings. Her interview helping to expose the prevalence of these situations and the systematic failures that allow them to continue. The documentary led to even more awareness. Several women who'd been in situations similar to Sarah's reached out, some sharing their stories publicly for the first time. A few had been victims of Marcus specifically, women who'd never reported their experiences because they thought no one would believe them or because they blamed themselves. One woman, Victoria, had been 19 when she met Marcus at a gallery opening. She'd been an intern at the same real estate agency where Sarah's mum worked, though this was years before Sarah's mum started there. Victoria's story was heartbreakingly similar to Sarah's. The special attention, the expensive gifts, the gradual isolation from friends and family, and eventually an abusive relationship that left her emotionally scarred. "I thought I was the only one," Victoria said in her interview for the documentary. "I thought I'd somehow brought it on myself by being too flirty or sending the wrong signals. It wasn't until I saw Sarah's interview on the news that I realized I'd been groomed and abused, just like she was." Seeing her bravery in coming forward gave me the courage to finally deal with what happened to me. Victoria started therapy and eventually filed a civil lawsuit against Marcus, though he had no assets to speak of since everything had been seized to pay for Sarah's settlement. But Victoria said the lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about having her experience officially acknowledged and validated. Through Sarah's advocacy in the documentary, a pattern emerged. Marcus had targeted at least 7 young women over a 15-year period, possibly more who never came forward. He'd been remarkably consistent in his approach, always choosing vulnerable young women who were in some way dependent on him or the institution where he worked. Interns, employees' daughters, volunteers, always someone who had something to lose if they spoke out. The documentary also explored systemic issues. How organizations often protect their own reputation over the safety of vulnerable people. How complaints about inappropriate behavior are frequently dismissed as misunderstandings or misinterpretations. And how predators are skilled at appearing charming and trustworthy to those in power while abusing those without it. Sarah became something of an expert on these dynamics. She was invited to speak at conferences, high schools, and universities about recognizing grooming behaviors and creating safer environments for young people. Despite her young age, she was still just a college sophomore. She spoke with authority and authenticity that came from lived experience. I watched all of this with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Pride in how Sarah had transformed her trauma into purpose, and heartbreak that she'd had to experience such trauma in the first place. As for me, the experience changed my career path. I'd originally planned to study business, but after everything that happened with Sarah, I switched my major to social work. I wanted to be someone who could help people in crisis, who could advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. During one of our weekend visits, Sarah and I were walking around her campus grabbing coffee and catching up on everything happening in our lives. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked her. "Coming forward, I mean. All the public speaking and advocacy, it must be exhausting, constantly reliving your trauma." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes I wish I could just be a normal college student who doesn't have to think about sexual predators and trauma and advocacy. Sometimes I'm jealous of people who get to be naive about these things because they've never experienced them." She paused to take a sip of her latte before continuing. "But then I think about Victoria and the other women who came forward because of my story. I think about the high school girls who've reached out to say that hearing me speak helped them recognize that they were being groomed by someone and gave them the courage to get out. I think about the teachers and administrators who've told me that my presentations have changed how they look at inappropriate relationships in their schools. So no, I don't regret it. This wasn't the life I would have chosen for myself. If I could go back and prevent any of this from happening, I would in a heartbeat. But since I can't change the past, I can at least try to change the future for other girls. That feels meaningful. That feels like I'm taking something terrible and using it for good." I nodded, understanding. "You're incredibly brave, you know that." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't feel brave. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. I keep going because what's the alternative? Let Marcus and men like him win. Let other girls suffer the same way I did. I can't do that." As our college years continued, Sarah's advocacy work expanded even further. She helped draft legislation in our state that would require mandatory reporting of suspected grooming behavior by professionals who work with minors. She testified before the state legislature, her testimony moving several lawmakers to tears and ultimately helping pass the bill. The law, nicknamed Sarah's Law by local media, though Sarah herself found that embarrassing, required enhanced background checks for adults working in positions of authority over minors, and created a state database where complaints of inappropriate behavior could be logged and tracked across different institutions. It wasn't perfect. No law could completely prevent predatory behavior, but it was a step in the right direction. Sarah also worked with the documentary filmmakers on a follow-up project focused on solutions rather than just problems. This film showcased various programs and policies that had been effective in protecting young people, from education initiatives that taught teenagers about healthy relationships to institutional policies that made it harder for predators to operate in the shadows. During the filming, Sarah interviewed numerous experts, psychologists who specialized in predatory behavior, law enforcement officers who worked on sex crimes cases, and other survivors who'd become advocates. She asked tough questions and pushed for concrete answers about how to prevent these situations from occurring in the first place. One expert who particularly impressed Sarah was Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a psychologist who'd spent decades studying grooming behaviors and working with both victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse. The thing people need to understand, Dr. Martinez explained in her interview, is that grooming is a process. It doesn't happen all at once. Predators like Marcus gradually normalize inappropriate behavior, test boundaries, and isolate their victims over time. If we can teach young people to recognize the early stages of grooming, the excessive attention, the special treatment, the secrets, the boundary violations, they can get out before things escalate. Sarah took this message to heart, incorporating it into all her speaking engagements. She developed a presentation specifically for teenagers that outlined the warning signs of grooming in clear, accessible language. She talked about how predators often target young people who are lonely, who come from difficult home situations, who are dealing with mental health issues, or who simply lack strong support systems. "I was a perfect target for Marcus," Sarah would tell her audiences. "My parents had just gotten divorced. My mum was working all the time trying to keep us afloat. I felt invisible at school, like I didn't really matter to anyone. And then this charming, successful man started paying attention to me. He made me feel special, seen, important. Of course I fell for it. That's what grooming does. It fills a void in your life so effectively that you don't realize you're being manipulated until it's too late." She'd always pause here, making eye contact with people in the audience before continuing. "But here's what I want you to understand. If you're being groomed, it's not your fault. You're not stupid or weak or asking for it. You're being expertly manipulated by someone who has likely done this before and who knows exactly how to exploit your vulnerabilities. The responsibility for abuse lies entirely with the abuser, not the victim." This message resonated deeply with her audiences. After almost every presentation, at least one person, and often several, would approach Sarah privately to share their own experience with grooming or abuse. Some had never told anyone before. Sarah would listen, validate their feelings, and connect them with resources for support and healing. I often attended Sarah's presentations, partly to support her and partly because I was working on similar issues in my social work studies. I watched as she commanded rooms full of people, some skeptical, some already convinced, all of them leaving with a deeper understanding of how grooming and sexual exploitation actually work. The presentations weren't easy for Sarah. She'd told me that sharing her story over and over again was re-traumatizing at times, that some nights she'd come home from an event and cry for hours, all the pain and fear flooding back. But she kept doing it because she believed it mattered. By our senior year of college, Sarah had become a minor celebrity in the world of survivor advocacy. She'd been profiled in several major publications, interviewed on podcasts, and invited to speak at national conferences. Universities were already expressing interest in having her join their faculty after she completed her graduate work. But despite all this external success, Sarah was still grappling internally with the trauma of what had happened to her. Her therapy continued, and probably would for years to come. She had trust issues that affected her romantic relationships. She dated a few people in college, but the relationships never lasted long. The moment they got too serious, too intimate, Sarah would panic and pull away. "I hate that he still has this power over me," she told me one night during our senior year. We were sitting on my apartment balcony looking out at the city lights. It's been almost 5 years since everything happened with Marcus. 5 years of therapy, of advocacy work, of supposedly healing. And I still can't have a normal relationship. The moment a guy tries to get close to me, I freeze up. I start seeing manipulation everywhere, even when there probably isn't any. "That's normal," I assured her. "Trauma doesn't have an expiration date. Healing isn't linear." "I know that intellectually," Sarah said. "I tell survivors that all the time in my presentations. But living it is different. There's this guy in my psych program, Daniel. He's smart and kind, and he's made it clear he's interested in me. And I'm interested in him too. But every time we hang out, I'm analysing everything he says and does, looking for red flags that probably aren't there. I can't just relax and enjoy spending time with him. Have you talked to him about your history? Not the details, just that I'm a survivor of sexual abuse and that I have trust issues because of it. Sarah sighed. He was really understanding, said we could take things as slow as I needed. Which is great, except I don't know if I'll ever be ready. What if Marcus broke something in me that can't be fixed? You're not broken, I said firmly. You're healing. There's a difference. And maybe Daniel is patient enough to wait while you figure things out, or maybe he's not. But either way, you're not broken. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. Thank you for always being here for me. Through all of this, I know it can't have been easy, dealing with my trauma secondhand. You're my best friend, I reminded her. I'd walk through fire for you. A little secondhand trauma is nothing. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching cars pass on the street below. As graduation approached, Sarah made a decision. She'd been accepted to several prestigious PhD programs in clinical psychology, but she chose to defer her admission by a year. She wanted to take time to focus on herself, to travel, to experience life as something other than a victim-turned-advocate. I need to figure out who I am beyond this, she explained. For the past 5 years, my entire identity has been wrapped up in what happened to me and my advocacy work. I want to know who Sarah is when she's not constantly thinking about Marcus or sexual predators or survivor support. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, I told her. You deserve to just exist for a while without carrying the weight of all this on your shoulders. So Sarah took that year. She travelled to Europe, backpacking through countries she'd always wanted to see. She got a part-time job at a bookstore, something completely unrelated to psychology or advocacy. She dated Daniel, and this time, without the pressure of school and public speaking commitments, she was able to relax into the relationship. They didn't rush anything, taking months to build trust and intimacy at Sarah's pace. I finished my social work degree and started working at a non-profit that provided support services to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. In many ways, my career path had been shaped by Sarah's experience just as much as her own had been. During that year, Sarah called me less frequently than before, which I took as a good sign. She was building a life that didn't revolve around trauma. She sent pictures from her travels, stories about amusing customers at the bookstore, updates about her relationship with Daniel. When she did finally start her PhD program, she returned to advocacy but with better boundaries. She still gave presentations and interviews, but she limited how many she accepted. She prioritized her studies and her relationship. She made time for hobbies that had nothing to do with sexual abuse or trauma. She took up painting, joined a book club, learned to play guitar. I realized that being a good advocate means taking care of myself first, she told me during one of our regular video calls. I can't help other people heal if I'm burning myself out. And I can't let what Marcus did define my entire existence. Yes, it happened. Yes, it shaped who I am, but it's not all I am. But this felt like real healing to me. Not the absence of pain or trauma, but the integration of those experiences into a fuller, richer life. Sarah would always carry scars from what Marcus did to her. But those scars didn't have to be the only thing about her. As for Marcus, he remained in prison, serving his sentence. Sarah occasionally got notifications about parole hearings, which she attended to submit victim impact statements, ensuring he stayed behind bars. But she tried not to think about him too much. He'd taken enough from her already. She wasn't going to give him any more of her mental energy than absolutely necessary. The last time I saw Sarah was at her PhD graduation, several years after our undergraduate commencement. She'd completed her doctorate in clinical psychology, with her dissertation focusing on trauma-informed care for survivors of sexual exploitation. It had been published in several academic journals and was already being used to inform treatment protocols at clinics around the country. At the graduation ceremony, I sat with Sarah's mom, Daniel, now her fiancé, and several other friends and family members. When Sarah's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, we all cheered louder than probably appropriate for an academic ceremony. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, she'd done it. Afterward, at the celebratory dinner, I proposed a toast. To Sarah, I said, raising my glass, who took the worst experience of her life and transformed it into purpose and healing, both for herself and for countless others. Who showed all of us what real courage and resilience look like. Who never gave up, even when giving up would have been so much easier. I'm proud to call you my best friend, and I can't wait to see all the amazing things you'll do as Dr. Mitchell. Everyone clinked glasses and Sarah wiped away tears. Later, just the two of us stepped outside for some air. We stood on the restaurant's patio looking up at the stars. Remember when we were 16? Sarah asked. When you showed up at my house with those cheap cookies and saw Marcus there? Of course, that was the night I knew something was really wrong. I was so angry at you that night, so embarrassed that you'd seen me like that you'd figured out my secret. I thought you were going to ruin my life by exposing the relationship. She laughed bitterly. I had no idea you were actually saving my life. You saved yourself, I corrected. I just helped you see what was really happening. No, Riley, you saved me. If you hadn't kept pushing, if you hadn't refused to let me push you away, if you hadn't gathered all that evidence and helped me report it, I don't know where I'd be right now. Probably not here, that's for sure. Maybe I'd still be caught up with Marcus or someone like him. Maybe I wouldn't even be alive. The stark reality of that statement hung in the air between us. It wasn't melodrama. We both knew it was true. Girls in situations like Sarah's sometimes didn't make it out. Sometimes the story ended in tragedy, suicide, murder, or a lifetime of exploitation and abuse. But I did make it out, Sarah continued, her voice stronger, because you wouldn't let me go, because you were willing to risk our friendship to keep me safe. That's the kind of friend everyone deserves, but not everyone has. We hugged for a long time, both of us crying, both of us grateful for the other's presence in our lives. Today, Dr. Sarah Mitchell runs a clinic that specializes in treating survivors of sexual exploitation and grooming. She still gives occasional presentations and interviews, but her primary focus is on direct patient care. She's helped hundreds of people begin their healing journeys using her own experience to inform her practice while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. She and Daniel got married 2 years ago in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. They're talking about having children someday, though Sarah has mixed feelings about bringing kids into a world where predators like Marcus exist. But that's also why I do this work, she told me recently. So that maybe, by the time my hypothetical kids are teenagers, the world will be a little bit safer. So that fewer people will have to go through what I went through. As for me, I continue my work in social services, now overseeing a program that connects survivors of abuse with resources and support. I often think about how one decision, the decision to confront Sarah about Marcus, despite knowing it might end our friendship, changed both of our lives so dramatically. Oh, I think about the girls who don't have a friend willing to ask hard questions or take action. I think about the survivors who blame themselves for their abuse because no one has told them it wasn't their fault. I think about all the predators still out there, still grooming vulnerable young people, still getting away with it because silence protects them. And I think about Sarah, about her courage in not just surviving, but in turning her survival into something meaningful. She didn't have to become an advocate. She didn't have to put herself through the trauma of testifying or giving presentations or sharing her story with strangers. She could have hidden what happened to her, tried to forget it and move on quietly. But she didn't. She chose to speak up, to fight back, to make sure her experience might prevent others from suffering the same way. That's not just survival, that's heroism. The story of what happened to Sarah isn't unique. Every day, somewhere, a young person is being groomed by an adult who should know better. Every day, someone is trapped in an exploitative relationship, convinced they're in love when they're actually being abused. Every day, friends and family members see warning signs but don't know what to do or are afraid to intervene. I'm sharing this story because I want people to know what grooming looks like. I want them to recognize the warning signs, the age gaps, the secrecy, the expensive gifts, the isolation, the insistence that the relationship is special or different from normal relationships. I want them to understand that if they see these signs in a friend's life, it's not enough to just hope everything works out. Sometimes being a good friend means doing the hard thing. It means confronting your friend even when they'll be angry. It means gathering evidence, reporting to authorities, and refusing to be silenced. It means standing by your friend through the aftermath, through the healing process, through the dark days when they can barely get out of bed. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. And you might lose the friendship, at least temporarily. But if it saves someone's life, if it helps them escape a situation that could destroy them, it's worth it. Sarah survived because she had people who refused to look away, who took action even when it was difficult. Not everyone is that lucky. But if we all commit to being that person, the friend who asks hard questions, who takes warning signs seriously, who acts when action is needed, maybe fewer people will suffer the way Sarah did. That's the lesson I've carried with me from this experience. Silence protects predators. Speaking up saves lives. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to let them face their demons alone. If you're reading this and you're in a situation like Sarah's was, please know, it's not your fault. You're not stupid or weak or asking for it. You're being manipulated by someone who's skilled at manipulation. What's happening to you is not love, it's exploitation. And you deserve better. Reach out to someone you trust. A friend, a teacher, a counselor, a parent. If you don't feel safe talking to someone you know, call a hotline like the National Sexual Assault Hotline, 1-800-656-4673, or text HOME to the crisis text line, 741741. There are people who will believe you, who will help you, who will take you seriously. And if you're reading this and you see warning signs in a friend's life, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Be the person who asks the hard questions. Be the person who takes action. You might just save their life. The story of Sarah and Marcus isn't over, not really. Sarah continues to heal, to grow, to help others. Marcus continues to sit in prison, his predatory behavior finally stopped. And I continue to tell this story, hoping that it might prevent even one person from experiencing what Sarah did. Because that's what we do when we survive something terrible. We share our stories. We warn others. We create meaning from pain. We refuse to let the darkness win. And in the end, that's the real victory.